Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of ATD Accidental Trainer Podcast. I'm your host, Alexandria Clapp, and today we have with us Bianca Baumann. She is the VP of Learning Solutions and Innovation at Ardent Learning, and Mike Taylor, who is a learning consultant at Nationwide. Hello, Bianca and Mike.
Hello.
Hello, Alexandria.
Welcome, welcome. I'm so excited to speak with you both about your new release book, Think Like a Marketer, Train Like a Pro. Congratulations.
Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Okay, we are going to dive in. We won't have enough time, as always, but hopefully it'll be a fun conversation to celebrate all of the work that you have put in and give folks a sneak peek about what the book is all about. But first, let's get a little bit of a talk going about your origin stories and any fun accidental moments that have helped you arrive at this moment today in your careers.
Sure, I'll get us started today. So, I started my professional career in an email marketing automation organization called Eloqua, which is now part of Oracle. And there I was an education specialist, and that's really where I first encountered marketing because I was teaching marketers how to be better marketers while doing my actual job as an L&D professional. And so this is really where the origin for me comes from, that overlap, because I saw what marketers are doing is very similar to what we are doing, which is trying to get people's attention and change behavior. Often they just do it slightly better. And I don't know if I would call it an accident, but when I first started working there, I saw the overlap, but I started blogging and I was focusing more on customer education because that's what I was doing at the time. And I started blogging around this, and I just didn't really get the traction that I was hoping to get. And so I was just like every good marketer does, I guess, playing around with the messaging a little bit because I wanted to reach a different target audience, more learning professionals versus marketers there too. And because at the time, customer education wasn't a thing. And so out of that trial and error, I kind of landed with this understanding of, oh yeah, we should really bring marketing techniques into learning and development. And yeah, many, many, many years later, we're here talking to you about this. And yeah, I know Mike has a very similar background in terms of the overlap between marketing and learning.
Yeah, so I feel like I'm in the right place today when you're mentioning the title accidental trainer. Like my entire career is accidental because when I was growing up, even when I was a kid, I've always been energized by learning new things, but I had no idea that could be a career. I thought, oh, it might be cool to be a teacher or a professor because that's the only thing that I knew, which I think is probably fairly common. So, long story short, I had a job when I first got out of school that I didn't love, and I was still young, and I'm like, I didn't want to do this the rest of my life, so I quit without having anything lined up. And the very same week that I quit, there was a job posting for an adult education, so teaching. And I thought, okay, well, I'll try this out. Tried that out at a vocational school. They had a software training area. I'm like, well, that sounds cool. So happy accident number two, I started to do software training. And then I'm like, oh, okay, I kind of like this. This is kind of cool. Well, what about designing this stuff? So another happy accident, you start to go into the instructional design piece. And then, well, what is this e-learning stuff? And so the light bulb went off that this is a career. I went back to grad school for a master's in educational technology. And it's really been this path of, following that curiosity. And then fast forward, I spent about 4 or 5 years working for a digital marketing agency. And, that's where I sort of realized like, hey, marketers and trainers were trying to do the same thing, but marketers usually are doing it in very different ways and oftentimes a lot better. And so that was kind of my background in history. And then, the best accident of all was when I met Bianca and then we started collaborating, and that's how we got here today.
I was going to ask about that as my follow-up. How did you two bump into paths with each other in terms of both having this idea to take marketing strategies and incorporate it into L&D?
We were on a online conference about marketing and learning back in 2017, and we're on a panel together, and that's where we both realized, like, oh, this person has very similar ideas and complementary ideas to what I have. And we started kind of following each other, and then it was November and I reached out to Mike for his birthday on Twitter. At the time it was still Twitter, and said, hey, happy birthday. And then Mike responded, thank you. You know what he says, I think we should do something together. And I'm like, what? Mike Taylor wants to work with me, has all these followers, that's amazing, yes please. And so we decided, crazy as that sounds now, to submit speaking proposals for DevLearn the year after. And to our surprise and shock and delight, we actually got in with a concurrent session and a full day workshop. And then we actually had to work on that and started meeting virtually and getting ready. And then we met on a Monday evening in person for the very first time, the night before we actually did the workshop together. And well, it all worked out beautifully. And I guess the
And
rest
here
is
we are.
history. Here we are with a book.
And was that workshop post-COVID or pre-COVID? Wow.
Yeah, post-COVID, pre-COVID. It was
Pre.
pre-COVID. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
pre-COVID. Mm-hmm.
Look at you guys.
Yeah.
I'm just, curious. Of course, we'll have to come back to technology. Mike, people know you for your curated finds on technology. So we have a chapter devoted to that. But first, let's start a little broader, a little bigger. Your book, we're just going to jump right in. Maybe this is provocative that L&D should think like marketers. Though I keep saying, isn't this obvious? Maybe you guys have just packaged it so well, because part of me was wondering, why aren't we doing this already? So, why do you think that it's a mindset shift for the profession? Why do they need it now more than ever if they're not already doing some of this?
Yeah, but Bianca mentioned it a little bit earlier, and I think we're really trying to do the same thing as marketers, right? We're trying to get people's attention. We're trying to influence their behavior. And the thing that marketers could be an advantage over a lot of training stuff is they've got oftentimes a direct sight to what's the impact. So they run a campaign, they see increases or decrease in sales, so they can attribute, hey, this campaign resulted in more sales. So that gives them credibility and budget and all those sort of things. And it's oftentimes fuzzier for us. But as a result of all that, they spend a lot of time on understanding how do people process information? What do people pay attention to? And they also recognize that they're up against a lot of things they're competing with. I think sometimes we in training have this sort of default view of, well, it's in the LMS. They don't have any choice. They have to pay attention to it. And so they don't think about it very much. And I think that's a mistake. And obviously marketers are really, really good at that, at grabbing people's attention and, breaking the pattern of boring messages and all that sort of stuff. And I will say it's not just about the attention piece, because you can be really good at getting the attention and then not delivering the goods, and that's the clickbaity thing that nobody wants to have. So you still have to deliver value, but it's the combination of those things. It's, how you get people's attention, how you speak to them. You have to understand them really well to know what they care about and what they will pay attention to. So I think it's a no-brainer to kind of borrow and beg and steal the things from marketers that are working. Oftentimes, like I said earlier, it's a lot more effective than what most training folks do.
You mentioned attention, and there's influence in there. So, what do you think are the biggest missed opportunities for L&D to be thinking like marketers? And maybe this is an opportunity to sort of get a sense of the flow and some of the chapters of your book. I'm trying so hard not to say, let's go chapter by chapter and tell us a little bit about each one. So I'm trying to mix it up here.
I'll say one thing, and then I'll let Bianca weigh in here. But I think one common thing that a lot of training teams fall into is skipping straight to content and not really understanding their audience and what they care about, and what drives them and what are their challenges, what's the environment they're working in, all those sort of things. And when we skip to content and go with that sort of one size fits all approach, it really means one size fits none.
Yeah, and to add to that, yeah, understanding your learners is really, really important. But even when we think about content, we often jump to, okay, I'm sitting down, I'm writing something. So it's very tactical versus taking that step back and being a little bit more strategic. So marketers are really good with using what's called a content strategy. And so I think, we can definitely learn something there. But then once you have that in place, is then, yeah, writing better, using visuals to then speak to those emotions and behavior, not emotions and motivations that our learners have. And then from there, you can put it all together into kind of a learner journey or learning campaign to really make it come to life. And then obviously use technology to measure it or to deliver it and to measure it. And then, kind of it's kind of a circle, right? You go back, you get your feedback, and then you go back and you improve. And you asked like, why is it now more important than ever? there's there's always been a lot going on for our learners and for our employees, and it feels like, with everything with AI, and now we're creating more, in brackets, bad content. And it's getting harder and harder for our learners to kind of cut through that noise. And so to be strategic, to be very focused on attention grabbing strategies, I think is, yeah, it's just crucial because our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter, and we're asked to do more in less time. And yeah, we're constantly running between meetings and emails and this and that, right? So the little bit of time and attention they can give us, we need to make good use of that time.
Hmm. Yes, one of those very important resources. Okay, you mentioned content strategy. So you have an entire chapter devoted to this. I want to jump back to that. Maybe we can kind of walk through what is an effective. This is where I kept thinking as I was going through this book, why don't why don't we have an effective content strategy already? But tell
Beats
us,
me.
help us understand.
Beats me, but I like to think of it, imagine you go into a grocery store, right? And you pull something off the shelves. And then, next time you go, the product has to be replenished, right? And so this happens because there's an inventory in place. So the store keeps track of what's happening. And that is how I like to imagine a content strategy. It's us keeping track of the content that we have. Most organizations just put their content into an LMS, LXP, CMS, whatever system you might have. And hardly ever do we actually think about what that content does, where it sits, how we could possibly curate it, how we could repurpose it, right? So basically, instead of starting to write your content, take a step back and say, okay, I have this learning initiative that I want to tackle. What are my goals? What am I trying to get out of this from an impact perspective? What do my learners need to know or do differently after? And then start looking at what kind of content can actually help me do that. And when we ask people like, how do you define content? Like, people often say, oh, it's a video or an e-learning module, but content is actually just a written word, right? So it's really just a written word. It's the multimedia you use. And then the reason that this is important is because if you think about content without a format, so to say, it's much easier to then repurpose it later on. So instead of, having to recreate the wheel, you're like, okay, I go into this Word document where I have my content, and from there I rewrite it to be a video script, or from there I rewrite it to be an e-learning or a performance support or whatever it might be. But yeah, the content strategy really is like, what are the content types, my content channels? How do I deliver this? How do I measure the success of the content itself? Where can I make adjustments and suggestions?
Yeah, instead of, I don't know if people are doing this or they would admit it, but sometimes maybe that's a good way to phrase it,
Yes.
that there can be conversations of we need to do more video and we need to have them accessible on the phone and they need to be short. And that is where the quote unquote strategy starts, which
Hmm.
obviously has some repercussions down the road. I think marketing probably
Likewise.
does that too, but
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely, right? I mean, I'm sure there's some marketers there, if they were to listen to this podcast, they're like, you really think we have time to do a content strategy?
yeah.
But one can hope, but at least they have the concept versus L&D, it doesn't even have that concept, right? So I would argue there's more marketers than none that actually do it. But to your point there with from also timing and a resourcing perspective, what we hear often is like, well, we already have so much to do. Now you want me to be a content strategist? Well, don't go backwards, but as you move forward, right, start creating this inventory. And it could be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet, collaborative, on your SharePoint that everyone has access to, so you can keep track of what you're doing, right?
And another thing to go along with that is marketers are really good at repurposing. So they'll do a webinar and they'll make an infographic and they'll do a blog post and they'll do 12 social media posts. It's like all off of that original content. And so, I sort of call that work smarter, not harder. Don't reinvent the wheel for a bunch of stuff, is repurpose. And especially, you talked about tools and AI things now, it's easier than ever. And a lot of that stuff you can do pretty quickly. And so you could do one webinar, one video, whatever you have, and then you can build assets off of that pretty easily and quickly.
Okay, I just made a mental note out loud that I wanted to talk about tools and technology. And for anyone who doesn't know you, Mike, you have an entire newsletter. Is it the Friday Finds? Now I'm
Yep.
getting all mixed
Yep.
up.
Yep. That's
I
it.
don't trust my postpartum brain anymore. So many good tech tools that you're always experimenting with, exploring, finding. Okay, so let's definitely jump and talk about that right now. I also have saved, Bianca, something you said made me think, okay, we need to jump and address folks who are skeptics of this, like as if marketing has all the answers kind of thing. We'll jump back to that. But first, let's talk about technology because you guys have an entire chapter devoted to it. Chapter 8, Level Up Learning with Marketing Technology. Let's just talk about this. What are your recommendations? How can we work smarter with technology? I'll keep it.
Well, I mean, the cool thing is a lot of this stuff, people hear marketing technology, they think, oh, I don't have a budget and it's expensive. And it's really, that's not the case at all. There's some free and really inexpensive things that anybody could use. They could start using today and have it set up and working in an hour or two. So it's really accessible, which is the great part of that. And I think one of the things both Bianca and I have used in learning programs that's a really great entry into this sort of marketing technology world is email marketing campaigns. So we've all been on the receiving end of those. But what most people don't realize is how easy they are to set up and how powerful they are for delivering dynamic content based on what people do or don't do with those messages. So for example, I know Bianca has a great example of this from her time at Eloqua, but in a nutshell, I can spend a little bit of time building out a campaign which will deliver, let's say maybe I've got different roles in this learning program and there's different locations. And so I can deliver dynamically content based on the combination of your role and location so in an onboarding example, for instance, if you're in Louisville and you're a doctor, you're going to get different content if you're in Lexington and you're, a staff person. And that can all be automated and delivered really easily. And it's pretty powerful that you can do that. And then I would love Bianca to share her example because it really illustrates some of the power of what it can do.
Sure. So it was actually part of an onboarding program, and it was specifically around competitor training. And at the time, it was a 1 hour training for everyone, and it didn't have the impact for especially our salespeople. And it was actually not at my time at Eloqua, it was when I was at EventMobi, the event app platform. And so we did is we actually took the hour-long session and we made it into a quick kickoff, like 15, 20 minutes, where we got everyone into the room, managing expectations. And then we set up a 6 week email marketing campaign. And every week we send out one email about a competitor. And the dynamic content came in where the recipient's job role was different. So if the recipient's job role was sales, they got a much more in-depth content because it's really important that they really know the ins and outs of the competitors versus someone who, let's say, is an administrative assistant. They only need to know that there are competitors and who they are, and that's about it, right? And so we did that, and then with the help of email marketing tool, we were able to see who opened the email and who didn't. So if someone didn't open the email, we could resend that email, slightly different subject line, but very similar content. It did also require some additional manager nudges, I'm not going to lie. And then on week 3, we started to pull in a chat bot, and that was before AI, into Slack, which had a campaign in itself as well, and delivered content too. And then at the end, we were having like a closing session to just bring everyone together. And so this way we, as a one woman show at the time, so you can still, the content was almost already all there. I just had to go out a little bit on the competitors' websites to pull some additional resources, but that was rather quick. And so, yeah, you can set up something like this. It works really well.
Okay. Very cool using email campaign logic to keep personalizing for who your audience is and if they're engaging and how much they know and all of that. You also just mentioned, though, that you had a chat bot into Slack. Wait, what? So tell me about that. Tell me about that technology. Because
Yeah,
that's a whole other thing that would be really cool for people to start doing, right?
I know. So unfortunately, the tool I used at the time doesn't exist anymore. So because again, it was
There's
before
enough
AI.
chatbots out
It's
there. It won't
easier
be a
now. It's
problem.
I
easier.
just want to say it's definitely easier now,
Yeah.
but yeah, we just, I mean, there's Google or go to your favorite AI tool and, learn how to build a chatbot. It's Slack. Like it's, a lot of stuff is already out there and easily available and accessible. There's out of the box solutions still as well, but, you can now easily just, create your own. And yeah, it was just a really cool way from a performance support perspective, right? Imagine a salesperson being on the phone, the prospective customer is asking a question, and they can just quickly ask the chatbot that exact question, and then they get a response in the moment versus, oh, let me put you on hold and either ask my manager or, find the spot in the e-learning module, but I can't get there because the next button is grayed out. So, obviously that's not a very good idea. So that's kind of that chatbot is really think about it as that performance support tool.
I think one of my aha moments reading this, or maybe just a reminder, not an aha moment, or just that other other departments like marketing sometimes are quicker to like technology adoption and just taking advantage of it and using it. Just the fact that this is like pre LLMs and ChatGPT pre-pandemic, and you're talking about these like chatbots and stuff. But like nowadays, yes, the barriers to entry, what you need to know, how you're able to access these tools is so much different that folks can start running with some of these ideas and stories that you're talking about. I think everyone should have a performance support tool on their team that they have their own custom GPT that knows the institutional knowledge of like what they do. It just, that seems very accessible nowadays. Maybe, I don't know. So are people
100%.
building that?
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Yeah. And I would add to what you were just saying around the technology piece, because marketers do have a big advantage there because they, well, they have more money. But if you if
Okay,
you think back, I don't know how many years I
smart to
have
bring
to
that
go
up.
back, like 15 years or something like that, they didn't have all these tools. And it was really hard for them too to show the impact between what they're doing and a return on investment. And then, enter these marketing or revenue performance management tools. And now they're almost forced to use technology to do that because otherwise they're going to lose their jobs. Now compare this to L&D. We had the LMS since like forever, and that is the tool we use, and it does not show that impact. And it's almost like a given. It's like, oh yeah, sure, we're trying to show impact, but we really can't because we don't have the data because we have our LMS. So it's almost like the chicken and the egg, right? But I believe in us. Like marketing was able to do it. Why shouldn't we?
Mm. Mike, were you going to say something?
Well, no, I've just it all kind of this it's kind of cool how this all connects like back to content strategy and different delivery channels and right like don't force people to go places they're not already at and give them yet another place to go. Go to where they already are. So it could be Slack, it could be email. The funny thing, I often get funny looks when we start talking about email. They're like, email, everybody hates email. It's like, yeah, but everybody has email and everybody knows how to use it. And there's way more people on email than Twitter, Instagram, pick the
Mhm.
platform of the day. So just, you know, looking at your ecosystem of options and being smart about, how you reach people and when you reach them.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Where do you teach more about that strategy in this book? Is that part of content strategy? Is that part of your mapping the learner journey and meeting them where they're at, or is this sort of spread throughout?
I would say it's spread throughout because, I mean, you can obviously read each chapter as a standalone chapter, but they're also building on top of one another. And we have an example that we carry through the entire book as well to make it very obvious, kind of like, or help the reader to put this into action. And we also have activities at the end of the chapter to do that. But yeah, I would say, yeah, Mike, unless you disagree here, but I really think it's spread out, right? Because to your point, it's all interconnected.
Okay, so that leads me to let's talk about some misconceptions about what marketing. Maybe there's like some skepticism if there is anyone listening who's like, I think this is what you mean when you talk about what we can steal from marketing. And Bianca, you had given me an example before we hit record of what maybe folks think about most often. And maybe I was even getting mixed up as I'm telling you ideas of, oh, maybe we'll talk about these learner campaigns. So help us set the record straight. And I don't want to even share my misinformation. You just keep us on the right path here.
Yeah, and I think it's less of a misconception in general, but it's when Mike and I talk about marketing and learning, often people say, "Oh, so you wrote a book about how to promote our training." And the answer is no, we did not. However, there is elements in this book that you can 100% leverage for that, especially the chapter around learning campaigns, where we do talk about that pre-launch phase of before you launch your training. How do you want to, get people's attention, and how can you let them know about the training, which then also ties into the chapter about, attention grabbing visuals and just in general how we learn. But yeah, the book really is more around leveraging marketing techniques to design better training.
Okay. I have an example that's very broad. That's going to be very challenging. Let's say a team rolls out a brand new internal program. It's really good content. It's low turnout. Where should they look first? What may maybe they got wrong? Was it the messaging? Was it their content strategy? Was it the medium they used? Is it everything? How do you go about figuring out what went wrong?
Well,
It's
probably
hard.
yeah,
It could be all of them. It's like a trick question, but like how can we use ideas from your book?
I know. I think it could be a little bit of everything. So I would then start looking at the data, right? Because everything we recommend in the book is data driven. And so going back to any data you can get your hands on will definitely, hopefully, help identify what's going on. If there's no inside using the data, I would actively go out and talk to the learners to really understand, like, hey, what worked for you, what didn't, all right? How can we make this better, different, whatever it is. But yeah, it could be, a million different reasons on why a training program just doesn't work. But in my experience, it is often based on they assumed something about the learners that is not true.
And I would add to that, and I would check three important things. So look at what you put together, look at what you created, and is it simple? Is it useful? Is it resonant? So is it easy to understand? Is it accessible? Is it readable? I'm not using all these big complicated words. People get it. Is it useful? So is it relevant to the people? Again, which takes us back to understanding your audience. right? What's in it for me? Why should I care about this? And then the other piece, which I think is another easy opportunity for training people to start leveraging, is that emotional resonance piece. So if I know what they care about, I can speak to it in ways that will engage that emotional aspect. And that's going to get attention. That's going to help with retention. It's going to help with all of those things. So those three things I would always check: simple, useful, and resonant.
I love it. We're getting to cover so many things. I know I have a million questions and I'm bouncing around. You just mentioned emotion. What can we borrow from great marketers who do know how to tap into emotion? Let's say we evaluated it, something fell flat, we're not tapping into emotion. What can we do?
Well, I think it really, one of the things is, why should I care about your whatever you're training me on? Why do I care? Why is it relevant? We can all probably remember commercials and marketing things from when we were little kids, right? Like whether it's McDonald's or Wheaties or something, we all have those commercials in our head that we can still recite word for word. And it's, those types of emotional connections is like, the old McDonald commercial, two all beef patty special sauce. I'm dating myself of how old I am when I say that commercial, but that's what really flags our brains and our attention to pay attention if there's an emotional element to that. And that's free, right? Like that doesn't, you don't have to have any expensive software, or it doesn't take a lot of time. It's just changing your perspective on how you're presenting your information.
While we're chatting about emotion, you do have some cool resources and activities in the book. Can you give us a little teaser of what you guys have shared in your book?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things that stand out in that aspect for me are there are certain things that we're hardwired, that our brains are hardwired to pay attention to. Our brains are really, really wired to use shortcuts and heuristics. So some of the things that we're wired to is it gets to what I was talking about earlier. Like, is it personally relevant? If something's personally relevant, it's the example of, if you've ever been in a crowded party and it's really loud, but then somebody across the room says your name and you hear it, right? You can hear that through all of the other noise. It's kind of that concept of we pay attention to things that are personally relevant. And so the 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 first chapter has got 6 of these big sort of meta bias. I call them attention triggers that you can use. Is it visual? Is it emotional? A lot of the things that we were talking about. And then, when you start thinking in that way, whatever instructional design model you're using, that chapter also has some questions. So if you're in the analysis phase, here are some things that you can ask yourself. Am I leveraging these attention triggers? And so you don't have to change your instructional design model that you're using. You can pull in some of these attention triggers and sort of intuitive thinking things that our brains pay attention to and integrate it with what you're already doing to make that all work better.
And I would add to that, as you look into the chapter on learner personas, obviously that's where, when you sit down with your learners and really ask them questions, read between the lines, kind of what drives them, what their motivations and their emotions are. Because if you think about it, where motivation and emotions overlap, that's, where behavior is happening. And that's obviously where our bread and butter is that behavior change. So if I really understand what drives my learners, why they work, if they're making if we can answer the question for them, am I making a difference at work? That is really where that emotional aspect makes a huge difference.
Okay, I know we're running out of time. I have a couple more. I want to jump to chapter 9. You talk about measuring impact, and this, I think, sort of overlaps. I know a little bit with sort of there's just a lot of technology, a lot of new tools out there that make things more accessible. You talked also just about data storytelling, which I was like, oh, yeah, gosh, there's so many things in here that I wasn't thinking about that would be here in this book. So maybe you can give a little example of how we can steal from marketing, especially data and analytics. I'm always fascinated by this topic that our audience shies away from, and they rank it as their lowest capability across experience levels and across the whole function, kind of no matter what your role is. So I think that's going to be a really cool, fun chapter for folks to dig into.
Yeah, I think the reason it's so low for a lot of people is, well, we haven't really been asked to do it, right? And so we kind of got by without knowing much about it because, again, going back to my earlier comment about, well, we have the LMS and we have completion reports and seat times, and that's all we need. But L&D is so much more now. We do have a seat at the table, but that also means you have to speak the language of the business, and that means you have to tie your training programs to strategic objectives and business outcomes and strategic objectives to show the impact. And this means you have to go above and beyond the data and the metrics you can get out of your LMS. Look into a HRIS, but also look into just usage data. The intranet has a lot of information that you can pull from. But now you have all this data and all these metrics, and in order to make it more relatable to your stakeholders and probably even to yourself, that visual storytelling is really important. And there's great tools out there that help you create dashboards and pie charts and whatnot. But then to overlay that with the actual story of like, hey, here's how the program was set up, and here's what we're doing, and here's the impact, and here's what you're seeing. It's just, yeah, kind of serving it up in a way that we grab stakeholders' attention and keep their attention, and yeah, kind of practice what we preach, right?
Okay. I have a fun one before we get practical and then start to close out. If L&D had to sell learning on a billboard, like a marketer might sell a product, what could that message look like?
That's a great question. I love that question.
No, gotta think about that one.
And I'm trying to think of like some other advertising campaign that I can sort of tap into and steal and repurpose. I think
I,
I think for me, right, like these messages have to be super short and sweet and tight or nobody will remember them. So I think it would be something along the lines of, attention and emotion, like Bianca was saying here earlier, that sweet spot to get behavior. And so, I would craft some really well written little quip of,
Just do it, your
attention is
version.
yes, right. Just learn it, right? Like
Yeah, I'm thinking of, yeah, the examples that you talk about in your book. Yeah.
exactly.
don't know, I love this. I think, I was just talking to someone about this yesterday, that it seems like we lost the fun in learning. So, it might be something along the lines of, let's just have fun again, right? And put that on a t-shirt or a billboard. So, yeah.
Cool. Okay. So if there's one thing that our listeners could do this week to start thinking like a marketer, and I've been saying steal, like steal for marketing this whole podcast episode. So my apologies. Steal, think without needing a budget or whatever. What's one thing that folks can start doing?
I would say, rethink based on those three things I mentioned earlier. Is what you're doing, is it simple and easy to understand? If not, we need to unpack it a little bit more. Is it useful? Right. So that requires knowing your audience a little bit. And then are we being emotionally resonant? Do people care about it? Are we touching, the things that are relevant to them and that they care about?
Yeah, and I would say just talk to your learners. It sounds so easy and obvious, and I
It
know
is.
often, right? It is actually. I also know in certain organizations there's pushback around that, but I would just challenge that a little bit. Ask why. Why can't I talk to these people? Right? And at a minimum, let me send out a survey or something like that.
And I would say one thing that I often talk about is if you're trying to do something new and getting pushback, it's amazing what you can get away with if you call something like a beta test or this is just a test. We're just beta testing this, right? And then people sort of think, oh, well, it's no big deal. But it lets you get your toe in the door. And then once you can show something like, hey, this is working and I have data to support it, then it opens more doors.
I love that. I think that was one of my main takeaways from doing this podcast so often. Like any idea that anyone is talking about, just run with this pilot program idea. So, love, love, love that. Okay, we have teased your book a little. Congratulations again. I'm so excited for you two and to see you at our conference just coming up this weekend when we're recording, but it'll be have passed when this comes out. To close out officially, can you tell us how you two are learning and growing, getting out of your comfort zones?
Yeah, so for me, I have always been energized by learning, which I talked about earlier. So I spend time every morning sort of reading and keeping up and finding new things. And so I try so many things and so many new tools that I on occasion will find something and get excited about it and go to create an account and it says the account already exists. So I'm like, oh, it must not have been very good because I tried it before and I forgot about it. And so I think that concept, this is something that drives me crazy when I talk to learning people, especially, around new things like AI, and they say, oh, I don't have time to learn that. Like it's literally our job. And so I think it is super important to whatever portion of time you have is to set aside some time to experiment and to try new things, find better things. And it's not a cost of time, it's an investment because, my experience is you get that time back plus more. It's worth spending time to do that.
Yeah, very similar to what Mike said. I lead a team here at Arden, and I think for me, it's also just I learn from them every day too, right? So that energizes me. But then at the same time, I have innovation in my title, so I want to make sure, there's innovative things I think about and look at. And I mean, innovation really means you take two, three, four concepts that already exist and turn it into something different and new. And this is exactly what Mike and I have done with this book, right? So, but yeah, writing a book definitely is also learning a lot. So
Yes.
it's a big learning process.
Yeah. And now you get to do the fun part, the marketing part of your book. So, congratulations again. Thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.